morning. Thank you for those opening words. Chief Andy Alec with the Big Stone Cree Nation. I stand with my brothers today to advocate for site rehabilitation and advocacy work for environmental monitoring within our nations. Thank you.
Okay, that's an introduction. My name is Chief Ivan Sawan. I'm from Loon River First Nation, Treaty 8 Territory, and currently the Grand Chief of the KTC Tribal Council. It's really great to see everyone here today. Thanks.
Tansa Kakeo, Chief Isaac Labokan Avram with the Woodland Cree First Nation. I'm here to support the Abandoned Well program here, and also responsible and economic reconciliation. Thank you. Thank you for the prayer.
Good morning, everyone. Chief Greg Deschillet, current Board Chair, IRC, Frog Lake First Nation, Treaty 6.
Good morning, everybody. Chief Roy Whitney, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, Southern Alberta.
Good morning, everybody. Chief Kelsey Jacko from Cold Lake First Nation. I'm very fortunate for this SRP program because, you know, if it wasn't for this program, none of our wells would have been cleaned up. So I'm kind of appalled by Canada trying to keep this money because we have unfinished work here. So I hope Canada releases money and let Alberta keep the money so we can clean up the rest of our wells in phase 2. So thank you very much for being here today.
Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed chiefs, representatives of the Government of Alberta, valued contractors, and members of the media, I extend a warm welcome to Enoch Cree Nation, nestled in the heart of Treaty 6 territory. I stand before you as Chief Cody Thomas, humbled and honored to host a gathering of chiefs on the traditional lands of Enoch Cree Nation. Today we come together as leaders of our nations to demonstrate the power of unity in our commitment to environmental stewardship. One initiative that has demonstrated this commitment is the Site Rehabilitation Program, a beacon of hope for the remediation in abandoned and inactive oil and gas sites on First Nations lands, where previously no such program has existed. This program has not only played a pivotal role in revitalizing our lands, but has also created opportunities for Indigenous contractors and First Nations across the region. With 36 Indigenous-led contractors and over 50 subcontractors contributing their skills and expertise to the restoration of our lands across the province, this program has not only been an environmental success, but has also been a catalyst for economic empowerment, providing the meaningful employment and training opportunities for our people. Enoch Cree Nation has seized this opportunity to reclaim sites to a standard suitable for development, enabling us to prepare land for the Woskaya Business Park, a testament to the potential that lies within our territories. Our reclamation work under the program will allow us to expand our waste treatment facility, paving the way for a sustainable future for our community and increasing the standard of living for our members. However, our journey is far from over. The success of the Site Rehabilitation Program is dependent on the federal government's unwavering commitment to fully utilize the allocated funds. As of now, $135 million remains unspent in the program. Let me be clear, a failure to allocate those resources would mean abandoning over 2,000 sites on First Nations lands and territories. This is not just an environmental concern, but a moral imperative to uphold our collective responsibility to future generations. I call upon the Government of Canada, my fellow chiefs, and our industry partners to join hands in ensuring the continuation of this vital program in partnership with the Government of Alberta. Together we can leave a lasting legacy of environmental stewardship, economic empowerment, and cultural resilience for the benefit of all of our communities and nations. Thank you for your attention, and may our shared commitment to a sustainable future guide our endeavors. Hi. Thank you very much for being here. I'm going to ask that Chief Whitney come up, please.
Once again, good morning. Chief Thomas, thank you for the generous invite to your territory to be able to speak to such an important subject. For the elder, for his prayer this morning and his thoughts of wisdom. For my colleague chiefs who are here today, and for the government of Alberta through the ministers that are present with us. I'd like to begin by stating that there's too many oil and gas companies that simply have walked away from their obligations to remediate their well sites on First Nations lands. The SRP is a way for the First Nations to have abandonment sites reclamated. Accordingly, it's such great disappointment that we hear that the government of Alberta is, federal government, excuse me, gentlemen, federal government is attempting to abandon its responsibility to us as First Nations to ensure that the appropriate funding is allocated for such cleanup. They come in and they take our lands, they destroy them in many ways to the environment for future generation use, and we're stuck with the cleanup today. The federal government has a responsibility here. Indian Oil and Gas has a big responsibility here that they have neglected to fulfill. So, my colleagues, I appreciate the opportunity to be here amongst you today. Thank you.
Chief Sawan, Loon River First Nation. I guess what I want to say is this is an opportunity to collaborate with the government and with the industries. I'm really thankful for Alberta standing by the First Nations so we can secure this project. It's been a huge benefit for our nations throughout the years. You know, we've done a lot of great work already in regards to reclamation work. There's a lot of infrastructure that's been left behind in our communities that has really played a role in regards to environmental damage. The focal point today is environmental damage on our rivers and our lakes, our plants, our animals, our way of life. We need to secure this $135 million so it can go back to the nations and the contractors so we can create employment. Create employment for our people, training with the help of IRC as well, and with our neighboring nations as well. I think if there's a great value and takeaway from this program with the federal government and the province and the First Nations is cleaning up our land. I think it's high time that we push for the health and well-being of our people, and it starts by environmental cleanup. If we allow our infrastructure, the infrastructure that was left behind by industry and licensees continuously, we are not going to solve the environmental impacts that are having within our lands. So this is a real starting point for us. Let's tell the federal government to leave the $135 million so we can clean up our wells for the safety and the health and well-being of our people. And as a collective, this is an opportunity for contractors, for licensees, for industries, for federal government and Alberta as well to collaborate and clean up our wells. So I'm really thankful that the chiefs are here, communities are represented, and licensees are here today. And I just want to leave you with that is thank you all for attending.
Tanzi, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Elder Walter, where you went to. Thank you for getting us started off in a good way with a prayer. It's always the Indigenous way to start off with a prayer, so it's a good way to start the day, so thank you for that. To all the chiefs that are here and dignitaries, Minister Jean, members of Indian Resource Council, Stephen, he's a big part of the driving force on this, and I want to talk about that a little later. I'm happy to see all of you. It's always a pleasure to be at Enoch Cree Nation on Treaty 6 territory. We've had so many good announcements here over the last few years and just the last week or so, so it's a great place. Thank you, Chief, for letting us use the venue again. I remember 4 years ago, we were here to announce the site rehabilitation program. That's when it started. And then again 2 years ago to celebrate the many Indigenous communities and companies that were able to participate in that program. And now we've come together again to call on the federal government to allow this good work to continue. I thought it was 30 First Nation, but Chief corrected me, it was 32 First Nations that have already been involved. And we had all eight Métis settlements that were able to be part of the site rehabilitation program. That restored more than 5,000 acres of land and 1,600 sites. Indigenous communities can now use this land again. The program also gave hundreds of people in these communities good jobs and valuable experience. And I have to acknowledge the members of the staff of the Indian Resource Council who know what it means to increase Indigenous participation in the economy to get it working. And thanks again, Stephen, for all your work in this and for keeping my feet to the fire. The Indian Resource Council, in partnership with First Nation, trained close to 400 people in well site abandonment and reclamation. And the vast majority of those trainees were hired in the industry directly afterwards. And if you take a look behind me, all the hard hats and coveralls, they're the people that get things done. Good men and women out there working hard to get these things cleaned up. Many have even been able to start their own businesses because of this. And you talk about reconciliation, that is reconciliation. And I'm glad that we were able to be part of that. And economic reconciliation or reconciliation means empowering Indigenous people to find the opportunities that they've been denied for too long. It's about improving social outcomes through partnership and progress, enhancing livelihoods and supporting healthy, safe, and sustainable Indigenous communities. The site rehabilitation program is a tried, tested, and a true way of achieving that kind of economic reconciliation. Thank you to Minister Jean and the Indian Resource Council and all the First Nations involved for making the program a resounding success. You have proven without a doubt that this funding can be put to good use, and now we need the flexibility from the federal government to continue that good work. And we're going to work hard with all of you to ensure that the federal government lets us maintain that money and put it back to work. So thank you all for being here and allowing me to be with you. Thank you.
Yeah, just Chief Cold Lake, I'll just speak on my wells. CLFN has more than 300 oil gas wells and associated facilities on our reserve lands, with the earliest wells being drilled in the 1960s. Utilizing CLFN's business prime contractors, we successfully executed the site rehabilitation program in 2022, including downhole abandonments of more than 120 wells, decomposing of 8 pipeline segments, Phase 1 environmental site assessments on 128 wells, Phase 2 ESAs on 22 wells, remediation, reclamation of numerous well pads. Reclamation work for most of sites is ongoing as these activities are part of multi-year programs. Because the ASRP program timelines were limited to the 2022 calendar year, we have been supporting the continual efforts of the Indian Resource Council and Alberta Energy to exceed the unused monies, $135 million that was originally pledged by the federal government, extending the program to address the remaining liabilities. This will allow for the continuation and completion of remediation and reclamation programs that will return the land back to its original capability and address the outstanding liabilities that have been left behind us. So it's very important to us, so I'm hoping somebody in Canada, the federal government's listening and keep this money in Alberta so we can clean up our wells. Merci.
Good words, Chief. The work isn't done. The money does not have to go back to the feds. We got to do better both on First Nations land and also on our traditional territories. We need to continue to maintain the ability to hunt, fish, trap, and gather. We need to continue to work in partnerships with our provincial governments, our federal governments, and our communities that are nearby our homes. But the work isn't done. We need to continue to support good economic development with respectful and responsible partnerships. We are dealing with some cumulative impacts in certain demographic areas, and we need to continue to do better to clean those areas up. We need to maintain the land as an environmental stability so our children's children can continue to live off it, and so it could safeguard them to provide them with both jobs, moose meat, medicines, and everything else. Thank you for this day. Thank you, Chief Cody, for hosting us. But the money and the job isn't done yet. Let's get it done and let's do it right.
Good morning, everyone. Chief Greg Desjardins, Frog Lake First Nation. I just want to start off by giving thanks to the Creator, also our Elder, for starting us off in a good way. You know, I too, being one of the biggest beneficiaries in Alberta, we're very honored to have this SRP program in our backyard. You know, for too long, industry has came in and started off as a junior company, built themselves up, sold and left, but they also left behind a liability first and foremost. I want to just acknowledge the IRC, the former chair, Roy Fox, for his great work, but I also want to make acknowledgement to the Indian Oil and Gas and for their inability to hold up their fiduciary responsibility to the First Nation, which is why we're here today, speaking on our behalf and for ourselves as the First Peoples of the land. You know, and I believe, you know, that we clean up the land and we return the land back to or as close to the natural state as we can. And in Frog Lake and in some other First Nations, you know, you're looking at trying to plant sage. We're trying to do things that are outside the box. We actually had people crying to see this land being returned back to its natural state. We had people working. We had people feeding their families. We had industry, you know, being involved. The band-owned companies, member-owned companies that are involved, making money, making a living. You know what? This is what it's about. You know, the First Nations can't be left behind in this country. They call it the land of milk and honey. For too long, we have been the poorest people on this land and the owners of the stolen resource. So I too endorse this SRP project because, you know what, the benefits it brings to the nations, and it also brings back value to the land, value to the fields, and we're able to, you know, just belong, be engaged, and we're not opposed, you know, to progression. We just need to be included. So, you know, and the federal government can afford to leave that money here in Alberta, rightfully where it belongs. You know, for the First Peoples and the government, thank you for being here, the provincial government, the chiefs, you know, and the word that was shared, you know, collaboration, to work together for a final result that everyone benefits. So with that, I thank you for allowing me a few minutes of my time. Thank you.
Morning. Chief Andy Alec, Big Stone Cree Nation. Yeah, I also wanted to acknowledge the Creator as well as the Elder for the prayer this morning. I also wanted to acknowledge the leadership, the chiefs and councils. I also support the SRP program. There's many concerns that my nation has been experienced for decades. We have oil field in our backyards. We support the economic development, and we need the federal government to understand that there is a fiduciary obligation to our nation members for an improved quality of life, sustainability, and to be able to utilize their hunting, fishing, and their treaty rights. There's a number of concerns that we have, and oftentimes we're placed in a crossfire between provincial and federal government. We remain committed as nations to ensure the highest quality of standards of life for our people, and we also need the federal government to do the same. They can do this by keeping the money within the SRP program. $135 million is a lot, and it can do many things for our nation members. We need reconciliation, and we also need to grow and prosper. Thank you.
chiefs, elders, thanks for hosting us. It looks like we have consensus here. Everybody's on the same side, and it's good to see consensus when it comes to teamwork and success. And I'm really happy to join you today, along with representatives from many Alberta chiefs and communities and the Indian Resource Council. Our government's been working hard to enhance Alberta's reputation as a responsible energy producer while ensuring a sustainable sector for decades to come. I can't imagine a better project than this, when Indigenous Albertans need to clean up sites left by the federal government. We have the money in our bank account, and we just need the go-ahead from the feds. And a key part of this effort is making sure that the oil and gas infrastructure that different parties put in across this province is properly decommissioned and the sites are brought back to conditions similar to the state they were originally in. The site rehabilitation program, which was introduced during the COVID pandemic, as mentioned by Minister Wilson, helped accelerate this process by allocating $1 billion of federal relief funding to support the energy services sector for well, pipeline, facility, and site closure efforts. And we know that there's a lot of this still on Indian lands across this province. It ensured that, as it should have, resources, expertise, and jobs across the province, including in all of our Indigenous communities, remained in Alberta while the sector rebounded. The program was split into 6 periods, and period 6 of that program was designed to help ensure that Indigenous communities had strong participation. It targeted a total of $133.3 million in funding to clean up inactive oil and gas sites in Indigenous communities. During period 6, closure work was completed on 1,824 inactive well sites. Congratulations to all of you, great work. In total, 103 Indigenous-led contractors were responsible for 11,567 reclamation applications. Truly an incredible achievement and a good example of what we should be doing. Alberta's government is proud to have worked with Indigenous communities, Indigenous businesses, and the IRC from the beginning of the site rehabilitation program to work towards this great success. Throughout the program, we collaborated with an industry advisory committee and an Indigenous roundtable to make continuous improvements and to make sure we had success, which we did. The SRP's success would not have been possible without this close partnership and vital engagement. I would like to specifically acknowledge Stephen Buffalo, President and Chief Executive Officer of the Indian Resource Council of Canada, for his contributions to the program on behalf of the IRC. I was just talking to Chief Cody over here, and he mentioned that he'd like to have an opportunity to sit down with the federal government to have conversations about how to leave this money and get the best value out of it for Canadians. My goodness gracious, can we imagine a better project across this country than this project? The SRP also had a very positive impact on building oil field service capacity across the province to help better manage oil and gas liabilities for the longer term. And it's provided training opportunities in Indigenous communities and opportunities for Indigenous contractors to partner on projects. And what is it all about? The folks behind me here today. The SRP complemented other government initiatives focused on helping to clean up inactive oil and gas sites across Alberta. Now, we have made a good start, but we know there's still a lot to be done. And we have this money here allocated for this, and we would just ask the federal government to give us permission to utilize it for First Nation communities, what it was meant for and what it was earmarked for. At the end of the formal site rehabilitation program, there will be funds that did not get spent. And as it has been mentioned, it's around the $135 million mark. Now, we've specifically asked the federal government to keep these funds in Alberta for the benefit of Indigenous communities and continue this great success. We believe there are many additional reclamation opportunities for these funds where they could be used. And all of these chiefs agree with me because they all have these challenges on their reserve lands and they need to be cleaned up. And they are the federal government's responsibility. Keeping these unspent federal funds in Alberta would maintain the momentum that has been achieved by the success of the SRP and our reclamation program. Using these funds as they were intended to be used for supporting the cleanup of Alberta oil and gas assets. If the federal government is serious, if our Prime Minister is serious about reclamation and the environment and Indigenous Canadians and Indigenous Albertans, one way they can support it is by authorizing Alberta right now to use the funds we have in our bank account, these leftover federal funds, so that we can continue with the important work of helping clean up oil and gas sites on Indigenous lands, as is their responsibility. This cleanup is the federal government's responsibility. They have been the regulator and the manager of the projects that they left and that were left behind unclaimed. But Alberta is prepared to assist in continuing to help manage this successful cleanup, and I understand it's unanimous. They would like us to help them with that project because we are partners and we are proud that our Indigenous communities trust us to be involved. We strongly support the request the Alberta Chiefs and the Indian Resource Council put forward to the federal government to champion the reclamation work on their land. We've been doing great work together here in Alberta, and we look forward to continuing to collaborate with Indigenous communities for all of our mutual benefits. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Chiefs. Thank you very much, ministers, for partaking in today's advocacy to have possibly the federal government sit down with us as the chiefs of Alberta and have that open dialogue. So that is one request that I will make to the Prime Minister along with his team to come and meet with us as chiefs and have that conversation, give us the rationale as to why you don't want to allow these funds to continue within our nations, for us to clean up our lands and our fiduciary responsibility to our people and our ancestors. So at this time, I'm going to open up the floor for questions from the media.
Yeah, sounds good. So we'll start in the room here if there's any reporters with questions. There's a mic in the middle of the room if you do have questions. And then we'll head to the phones. But seeing no one going to the mic, we'll go right to the phones. So operator, can you put through the first caller, please?
Janet French, CBC. Hi there. Thanks for taking my question. First one is for Minister Jean. Just to be clear, there's no new money coming from the provincial government for the SRP, right? I guess I'm struck by how this program is contributing economically to these Indigenous communities. But even if the feds release that $135 million, let you spend it, that funding is only going to last so long. So what steps is the Alberta government going to take to try and make sure that this Indigenous-led industry is viable in the long term?
Well, as you're aware, Alberta's position is that polluter pays on this file, and as such, industry has to be ultimately responsible for this. And you know, no, it's not going to clean up every single well across Alberta, but we've had amazing success. $700 million was spent last year, which is almost 30% more than was expected to be spent by industry cleaning up wells across the province. We've had really good success. I think somewhere around 8,000 wells were cleaned up, for instance, in 2022. We continue to have momentum, but as you heard, this is the federal government's responsibility. In this particular case, they're the responsible polluter. They had they received the benefit, and they had the regulatory approval to get these things going in the ground and to keep managing them, so they have the responsibility to clean them up. And we have the money here in Alberta. And is there money by the Alberta government within this? Yes, there is. We have been utilizing our resources to manage this appropriately and work with the Indigenous communities and chiefs right across the province to get this right. And we have got it right. And in fact, I would suggest that the federal government has a responsibility to come here to Alberta and see how we've got it right and to emulate this across the country, because it's not just Alberta that has all these reclamation sites. It's right across the country where the federal government has responsibility and has been negligent, frankly, on that responsibility. So I say to the Prime Minister and his cabinet, if you're serious about it, let's start here in Alberta. Let's take this great work that we do as communities and as Indigenous leaders, and let's reclaim the land, and let's do the same thing across the country, but start here in Alberta where it's really working, and use the money that you've already allocated for that, and we'll manage that. And of course, there's a cost associated with that, but the Alberta government wants to work in partnership with the federal government and our Indigenous leaders and communities to get this right, because it's important for Albertans and all Canadians.
Janet, do you have a follow-up?
I do, and this would be addressed to, I think, Loon Lake Chief Ivan Sawan, or really any Treaty 8 chiefs that are there. The Athabasca Chippewa First Nation is now requesting that the federal ministers of health and environment investigate the presence and harms of naphthenic acids in tailings ponds in northern Alberta. And I'm curious, where do you think that all levels of government are falling short on preventing the cleanup and future continued expansion of these tailings ponds?
Thank you for that question. You know, the huge setback is regulations and policies in regards to tilling ponds, infrastructure being left behind. Why is there any strict accountability measures, legislations, policies addressing these issues right now? It's detrimental to our communities, our waters, our lands, the livelihood of our people within our communities, that these wells are left behind, the assets, the infrastructure. So I think definitely legislation has to be changed, policies have to be changed, and there needs to be collaboration in developing policies and procedures with First Nations and government to be able to kind of correct some of these wrongs that have been done for generations. We don't want to keep repeating history. So it has to be dealt with, and collaboration is first key to be able to iron out some of these indifferences that we have as First Nations. Thank you.
Okay.
And Janet, the chief just asked that I respond. I mean, do we have it perfect? No, we don't. But we are the best regulated jurisdiction in the world. We have the Alberta Energy Regulator. It's only getting better. We're doing a review, as you know, right now on it. But it is the best regulator in Canada, and I would argue the world. It's only going to get better. And what we need to make sure of, first of all, is that we come to the table and have discussions like this and work together for the better interest of all Albertans. And tailings ponds in particular have been a challenge for some period of time, but our government's working diligently on it, and we're making sure that we have great dialogue with First Nations communities and all Albertans, because it's an issue that affects all of us, as is our water is life, and it's very important to us. But Janet, let's be clear, we lead the world on regulation, and we're always looking for ways to better what we have right now. So I truly think that all we can do is see a brighter future from here, especially if we have good dialogue with Indigenous communities and the federal government.
And just to add to that too, the conversation that we've been having as Indigenous chiefs across Alberta is the possibility to have a representative from each treaty territory to be a part of the regulation and to sit on that board as well. So that is a conversation that we are having.
Okay. We'll go to the floor next. If you can indicate your name and your outlet. One question, one follow-up.
Hey there, Lisa McGregor from Global Edmonton. My first question is for Brian Jean and whoever else wants to chime in. Just for background and from your perspective, how did we get to this point? Obviously an issue came up where the government, the federal government, wants to take the money back that was already given. So, you know, why are they wanting the money back if there's no issue here in how it's being used?
Yeah, it just makes no sense. You know, Canada still has obligation to us when they're operating on a reserve. You know, they were managing our resources on our lands, and they never ever put money aside for it. You have these junior regulators that just sold out and sold to other people, so they have a fiduciary obligation to keep our lands pristine the way they were. So it's about time they put some money towards this, and it's not right for them to hold back the monies. You know, we need a seat at this table. And IOGC has to be held accountable too. And the AER, how do you build up the trust when we're moving forward? You know, we need a seat at the table. Mother Earth is suffering out there. Where's the balance? You know, it's always about money, 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 drill, drill, drill. There's not never money put aside. And that should have been done right from the start. Looking after environment, best practices. But I can go on and on about this, but I'll just leave it like that for now. Masi.
How did we get here? I think we just recognized we got here because, you know, this has been an ongoing issue within our communities. Environment is key. Water is key. Health and well-being of our people is key. Safety is key. When consuming that water in the north and within Treaty 8, it's not safe drinking water because of contaminants within those waters. There's horizontal drills, there's drillings that are happening, infrastructure that are being left behind. That is an effect on our health of our people within our communities within Treaty number 8. So when the program came out, that period 6 was the most successful program. Why? Because it had an Indigenous content within that period 6 That was the only reason why it was successful. You needed First Nations to collaborate with as a licensee to be able to clean up these wells, and it was successful. So I think with these monies that are set aside right now, $135 million, the content is still there. First Nations are stepping up to the plate, wanting to do cleanups in collaboration with industry, creating jobs within our communities. So that is the same initiative and incentive that we want, is to be able to clean up the wells with this remaining dollars that are here in Alberta. And I'm really thankful. Again, I'll say that there's partnerships within the room, and we still need to create those partnerships, build on those partnerships to be able to be successful together. Thank you.
Just before some clarity on this, though, specifically, you know, when I look at the media release, it tells me that there was money already given. Some of it's already sitting there, but you can't touch it. The feds are taking it back. So there must be a reason. There's just confusion around why can't you touch this money? What's the reason why they don't feel it's being used properly? Like, that's specifically, please.
The project timed out itself, and you know, there's just so many oil wells you can clean up because of obviously seasons and also the available crews. So it timed out, and we're just asking them to extend that, to leave it here, and to allow us to repurpose for what it was meant to be.
Good comments. The work isn't done. It just doesn't make sense for the money to be shifted back to the feds. But I want to talk about a little bit on the policy change. Yes, the regulatory, I'm looking forward to participating and continuing to approve that, but also the consultation. I believe that also that consultation should also be done through the life of the project. Like, usually we give the check mark and then it's bye-bye, and industry can continue to do what they want. I think we got to measure industry to make sure they are responsible, and we got to continue to advocate to do better within the oil and gas industry. It does provide jobs, it does provide sustainability and economy and all that good stuff. And I think we could do it right, and we got to make sure that the future looks better for our children. And thank you for this day.
Just wanted to add to that. So if you recall, during COVID, you know, our industry shut down. So the federal government allocated $1.3 billion to Ottawa, if I'm correct. And we set up these periods for reclamation to compensate for the loss of our energy sector really being held in just being stuck. And as we set these things, there was timelines to each period. So at the end of the day, during the timelines, we're stuck with $135 million. Now, I can appreciate the province's stance on this. They have to be cognizant. The federal transfers from Ottawa, this is odd. So Alberta sends $22 billion in equalization payments to Ottawa, which is deployed to the rest of the country and Quebec. A little bit in that federal transfer is the Indian Act money under the Indian Act of Indigenous Services Canada. And that's shared between 643 First Nations in Alberta, in Canada. I don't know if that number is correct, 644, something around there. But since Alberta is hanging on to $135 million, there's still federal transfers that need to come from the federal government to Alberta. So if they not send this money back, that might affect that whole transfer back to Alberta. I think that's the really answer you're looking for. But you heard the chiefs, it's important. And in retrospect, you look at the big picture. Canada is deploying money all over the world for humanitarian issues, which can be supportive, but what are the humanitarian issues here in Canada? You know, that's the thing. Keep in mind, our reserves are not getting any bigger. Our populations are growing. We're still needing housing and cleaner water, and make sure, not far from here is huge contamination. The chief talked about, wants a business park. There's huge contamination there, and estimated probably $20 million worth of work in that reclamation. And right now, the accountability measures are not the best. Our federal regulator, Indian Oil and Gas Canada, has not really been to the forefront doing what they're supposed to do, unfortunately. And AER, the Alberta Energy Regulator, is standing on the outside kind of seeing what's happening here. So we're just trying to find that balance to make sure that this makes sense. You know, the proposal from Alberta, from the Alberta chiefs, was $300 million for the next 4 years to do more work, which was declined by Minister Wilkinson, the energy minister, federal energy minister. And so this is what's left. And you can see the success, not through IRC, through their own communities, their own band members, their own entrepreneurships, and their own partnerships, you know, to make sure that this money is fully utilized in the best way. Because at the end of the day, the reserves are all we have left. You know, like our expansion of our communities ain't going to happen. So we have to do this work now. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Can I still get a follow-up? We've heard many times through conversations with Truth and Reconciliation, you know, too little, too late. That comes to mind with this. Can you maybe give us a tangible look of what it will look like if you don't get this money and your communities aren't able to progress or clean up these wells? Just so I think the average person needs to picture that for them to care and wonder how it's going to affect them. So if you could answer what it will look like down the road if we don't do something immediately, and if there's just a lack of accountability in certain areas.
Thank you for that question. I think the liability for our nations is substantial. The permits are given to us from Indian Oil and Gas Canada, which is a fiduciary responsibility of theirs. We all reap the benefits in Alberta of oil and gas for years, but like Stephen had said, we can't develop on those lands because they're contaminated now. We need to build the capacities in our nations. We need to increase the standard of living for our members. And when it comes to the factor that there's so much lands that we can't hunt on anymore because those animals have been grazing on those lands and are getting sick, and our nations aren't growing any larger. But it's the fiduciary responsibility of the government of Canada, and the liabilities and some of the experiences just within Enoch. Some of these sites aren't even documented. We've had oil and gas companies come out here and reap the benefits on our lands, and we haven't gotten anything in return for that, for our housing situations, for our clean drinking water, our boil water advisory still when we were so close to Edmonton. But the huge liability on us as a nation, as nations, that affect all of our traditional lands. And we're only a 4x5, and within the next 15 years, we're going to be Central Park because the city of Edmonton's just growing around us. And I don't know, for the other nations, I'd ask the chiefs to come up and speak on their experiences as well.
I just want to bring some insight in, if this program doesn't go through, you know, the responsibility by the licensees, the oil and gas companies, you know, the responsibilities of the federal government, Alberta government, and the responsibility that's been put to on my table as a First Nations representative. Today in Loon River First Nation, every turnoff, you drive into the community of Loon River First Nations, every turnoff is a pump jack, an infrastructure. You know, there's barrels, there's pipelines, facilities, everywhere, literally. There's a lot of abandoned wells within our communities, a lot of seismic work that was done previously in many years, drillings, horizontal drills, I'm going to say. So today we don't have much of a river. Our river and our quality of water has depleted. Every spring we bank on the runoffs on the rain because we are in need of storaging water. The cost of chemical to treat the water is through the roof, to treat our water. We're still on a boil water advisory right now because of the quality of the water. We have to build our infrastructure to be able to try and get to that level of acceptable drinking water, which is, we don't have good quality water. We have lands that have been occupied by licensees for many years that have taken up a lot of land within our communities that our infrastructure, housing, could be built within these lands, but it's taken up by the licensees. Abandoned wells. So that is kind of the landscape we live in today, because the impact, a significant impact on abandoned wells. So if Canada does not support the $135 million to be kept here in Alberta, so First Nations and partnerships can clean up those wells, and if they allow us to stay status quo and don't account for their accountability, the risks are huge. So I just want to make a heavy emphasis that we need Canada to listen to us as Indigenous communities. And I'm going to say it, I know there's two different stripe-colored governments that we always talk to, and then First Nations are caught in the middle. That shouldn't be a focus. Collaboration should be a focus. Partnerships should be a focus to be able to achieve in cleaning up our homes, our lands, our waters, our environment. Just to answer that question. Thanks.
Okay, we'll stick with the floor with outlet and name, please.
Yeah, Rod Muldoner from City TV. There's been a lot of talk about the oil and gas companies walking away and leaving these infrastructures in place. Was there not a legal obligation for them to clean them up? And if there was, how were they able to just walk away? Is there any effort being made to try and recoup some of those losses from those companies?
I've been told that I'll come up and answer this question. The biggest issue is, first of all, is most corporations pay their taxes and pay their obligations, their royalties and other things. In fact, just about all of them do, but some of them have, for whatever reason, under capitalization or bad management, the risk of going bankrupt. And in particular, on Indigenous reserves, it was the federal government that had the regulatory oversight, and they allowed these companies and operators to operate in a way that didn't put forward a proper bond or guarantee that they would clean it up afterwards. And although the majority of them did clean it up and follow through with their obligations, the truth is the obligations before this government, that is responsible for some of the things that have happened decades ago here in Alberta, didn't do enough. And that's the truth of it. Didn't do enough for our water and for our lands and for the reclamation responsibility of the Indigenous oil and gas group, nor did they do enough to make sure that corporations cleaned up their responsibility. This government is focused on cleaning up those negligent operators and making sure we work with our Indigenous partners. That's why we're here today, because we're here today to show not just our partnership and the trust between us, but to make sure that the federal government will come to the table and recognize what we're doing. We've had great successes on cleaning up wells here in Alberta and abandoned oil assets, and we need the federal government to come to the table and do what they are responsible for, and that is to clean up the oil and gas on First Nations. And I think Stephen wants to add to this, but the truth is they reaped the benefit for many years of huge gas and oil royalties, and didn't take the responsibility seriously enough on the cleanup. And we as a government are going to do what we have to do with our responsibility, and we're here today to implore the federal government and the Prime Minister to do what their responsibility is. Stephen, did you want to comment on that a little bit?
Thank you, Minister. Through the years, the First Nations have to deal with Indian Oil and Gas Canada. I think that's the first thing to understand. That's our regulator. They're our fiduciary trustee. And as companies come and do some exploration and production, there's infrastructure that's put in the ground, and there's regulations to monitor these companies. And as you see, some of them are smaller, some of them are big, and eventually walk away. The regulation was there to help protect the nation, but unfortunately our regulator did not enforce them. Therefore, they're at that critical point now. Some of the wells that you see that have been summarized on the screens here, some of them are abandoned and really should be orphaned. Indian Oil and Gas Canada does not have an orphan fund. Alberta has an orphan fund for off reserve, but we don't have one. And nobody wants to flick that switch to turn an abandoned well into an orphan well. So that's why this is so imperative that we get this work done. But the regulatory body, we're trying to work with Indian Oil and Gas Canada to continue a good path on not only reclamation, but reconciliation. And right now, it's really, the bureaucracy is really tough to get through. We can't even get a meeting with the Minister, Patty Haydu. So she sees this. I hope she takes the time to reach out, not to IRC, but to the chiefs, that it's important to meet with them, to hear the concerns, to discuss in working on the mechanisms that were set way back in 1990 to not only modernize the regulations, but to really help our regulator act in the best interest, not only for the communities, but for our province as well, and all the other provinces that participate with the Indian Resource Council. That's the hope here. So is there some accountability on both? It's accountability for everyone, but primarily our regulator is Indian Oil and Gas Canada. And I'm sure when the mechanisms are in place, when nations assert their own jurisdiction, we'll be calling upon the provincial regulator to really help us. Because if there's an accident that happens on any First Nation community, some catastrophe, here in Alberta, it's the AER that comes and helps us, not Indian Oil and Gas Canada. So that's where things are at, and I hope they get better. I pray that it gets better. Thank you.
Follow-up?
So we're talking a lot of money here, a lot of wells, and on reserves and off reserves, I imagine. Going forward, what have we learned from this? Is when these leases are being given now, are there bonds that are being taken in that will cover reclamation costs going forward? So we're not talking about this 20 years from now?
The oil and gas assets that we're talking about right now on reserve, there is, as mentioned, no orphan fund, no long-term plan or strategy to clean up these environmental hazards at all. So as far as the federal government, we don't really see, we saw an initial bright light in 2020, 4 years ago on this file, but since then we've seen nothing, and we see no long-term strategy or mechanism to get it done. On Indigenous reserves, I understand the answer is no, but I'll let the chief answer.
I just want to say, it's just being strategic. Like I said, somebody had the vision in 1967 to drill a well in Frog Lake. And that's our livelihood. So we're not opposed to development. The answer is, what we're doing on any new drills is a percentage of the barrel. So 10 cents on a barrel is a set aside up to 70K. So you'll have a benchmark at least if there's a transaction, if there's a sale of the oil company. At least, it took the First Nation to create something like that. So the answer is we are creating our own plan through a percentage of the barrel. Thank you.
Okay, go back to the floor.
Travis McEwen, CBC News. This might be a good fit for Minister Jean here, but if anyone else wanted to weigh in. Was there a deadline for the use of these federal funds? And if so, why weren't they used by the province before that said deadline?
Yeah, I just want to speak on the last comment there as Chief Jack for Cold Lake First Nation. With our partners in the past, they weren't very good partners, so that's something moving forward. They have to put money set aside to clean up some of our wells. It has to be better done, organized, right? So it doesn't make sense, all this money that Canada generates, and there's no money set aside to clean up our wells. But with our partners moving forward, that's an ask for them, or nothing's going to get done. Money set aside to clean up the wells moving forward. Aussie.
And my understanding is that it's actually negotiated nation by nation. And so many of the nations have seen the need for it and have implemented that, but there's no strategy on the federal government as far as that goes. Now, what was the question? I'm sorry?
I can repeat that one, no problem. Was there a deadline for the use of these federal funds? And if so, why weren't they used by the province before that deadline?
Well, first of all, we're a voluntary partner in this equation. We're holding the funds and we're managing the funds and we're doing the administration and management of it, but we're not actually doing the work. It's these folks here that are doing the work and managing the work and getting it done on their reserves and allocating the money accordingly. So it timed out, just a matter of 2 years and is not a very long time. 4 years is not a very long time when you're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. And as was mentioned by the chief previous to this, and this will be the last question, there's a lot of assets all around Alberta that nobody knows that are actually there. And where they're most notorious, in my opinion, based upon what I've heard, is on First Nation reserves. Nobody kept a proper inventory. Nobody cared about cleaning them up. And the federal government was a regulator. The AER does a better job and is going to do a better job in the future. And we're actually implementing programs and have over the past several years to make sure that we don't have this problem in the rest of Alberta. But let's make sure that, Albertans are all in this together. So even though the money has lapsed, it's just simply a time in the calendar. It doesn't change anything in relation to the asset and the amount of pollution and the amount of environmental damages on these First Nations reserves, and that they need to be cleaned up, and the federal government is responsible for it, and they've already allocated this in the books. Just let us keep it, manage it, and clean this up, and please come forward with the program. And if you need help on that program, come to the AER and come to the Alberta government, because we'll help them with that. Thank you very much for your question.
Okay, that I think wraps things up for this morning. If the reporters have additional questions, they can follow up with the media context on the news release.
I could just get a follow-up.
Sure.
Yeah. This is for Chief Thomas, actually. I know you've had a few news conferences where you've come out with the province and called out the federal government. And I'm wondering if there's more of an overarching message about the relationship with Treaty 678 in the federal government.
Yeah, thanks for that question. I think at this day and age, we need to find a collaboration and a unity. We're open to working with the federal government as well, but they haven't come to the table. The advocacy with the province that we live in, along with us as Indigenous, we got to increase that standard of living for all of us, the next generations to come. So that is the mindset. If we don't speak up, how are we ever going to be heard? I'm not going to stand outside protesting. I want to be at the table to have those meaningful conversations and create an opportunity for us as Indigenous peoples, for our future generations to come. So it's a collaboration. Our intent of our treaty was to always share, and I'm going to live as the chief of Enoch and the Grand Chief of Treaty 6 Confederacy, and I want to see us have an increased standard of living. You've heard from all of our chiefs that are here, even our ancestors that are no longer here. We're still on boil water advisories. We're still lacking housing, opportunity to create sustainable other revenue streams for our people to have an increased standard of living. I want to get rid of those narratives that we live off of taxpayers' dollars. That isn't the truth. And for us as Indigenous being at that table, we got to find that meaningful dialogue and that openness to find that balance between our heads and our hearts to work together. So that's why.
Okay. Thank you.